drmsh.com is your website, and that's like a hub to branch out to everything.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, so you're an expert in ancient Middle Eastern languages. Is that a good way to put it?
I would say ancient Near Eastern. It's it's an academic distinction that that few people will care about, but I guess the ones who are into it will know the difference.
Okay. Well, you're also a blogger,
Yep.
an author, as we just talked about. You do videos, podcasts, and I understand you're going to be doing a podcast number 171 tonight.
Yeah, we record that today. That's actually what I'm doing next after we're done with this. So we usually record on Friday afternoons.
I noticed that you're allowing people to vote on what the next subject is.
Yeah, the next series anyway, which begins. Boy, when does that begin? I know voting ends on the 14th. So if that's the case, well, that's actually Monday. Wow, that was fast.
Yeah.
That probably means that the first episode of the new series would be either the weekend of the 19th or the following weekend. It depends what Trey wants to do. We have a Melchizedek Q&A thrown in there too.
I kind of like Colossians because, being a person who enjoys the supernatural and, mystical stuff, it seems to me like when you read Colossians, there's a lot of that kind of
hmm
Christian mysticism and regenerating life and, that kind of thing. Is that what you find too?
Well, yeah, that Colossians would have gotten my vote, but it's actually in last place. If you go up to the website and you can click on see results or something like that, it's a distant third. So I'm a little surprised by that, but you get some of that in Hebrews though. First two chapters in academic talk, the Hebrews 1 and 2 is always spoken of as being connected to Jewish mysticism, and depending on how you define that, that's true. It's divine council stuff. But Colossians, I think, um, throughout, you that's sort of a touch point throughout the book. So I was kind of hoping for Colossians, but that isn't going to happen. It's not going to change in 3 days.
Um, yeah, and also it would be a good idea for people to sign up for your newsletter because I noticed that in the newsletter you get academic articles that are not available.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, in today's Q&A, I'm gonna give three more articles, which they're already in that folder. So yeah, if people subscribe to the newsletter, drmsh.com, and then on the right hand side there's this thing about signing up for the newsletter. I have an access link in each issue of the newsletter to a protected folder where people can find resources like that are not accessible on the web.
And you don't even have to pay for that.
Right, right. It's free.
Just sign up. The Logos Bible software is free as well.
Yeah, that's a good question because we did an episode. When did that go up? The episode with Danny and Ben Forrest about their book. Logos created I think it was logos.com/naked Bible is the link to it. And I don't know how long they're going to do that. I mean, nobody in the company told me, so I don't know what it's going to be. But if it's still there, yeah, you can get a number of resources and the software for free.
Yeah. My girlfriend Carmelina was we were talking about what to ask you because there's so many different things we could. We have you on for a limited time, and again we appreciate that. Are you able to take a certain word in the Logos and you can start paring it down in terms of meaning and usage and um,
Yeah, it's actually really easy. We've pioneered something that we call reverse interlinears, which the layman's definition of that is we take a translation. Let's just say the King James. I'm the guy who did the King James, both Old and New Testaments. But you take the translation, and then we created a tool that allowed me to hand link each word of the translation to the original Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic from which that translation was produced. And so you have all these, one to one, word to word, segment to segment links between the translation and your primary source languages. And what that enables people to do is when they're looking at the, let's just say the King James, we have 6 or 7 of translations like this that we did.
Hmm.
But if I'm looking at a word, I could right click on the word and select lemma, which is the dictionary form in the primary source language, and then run search on it. And the search generates a number of different kinds of reports. So you can actually do original language research without even knowing the alphabet. That's the genius of the system. But you can get reports that will winnow it according to usage, how the translation that you're working in renders it. You can get reports that are drawn from Hebrew and Greek databases where it'll tell you, well, here you searched for a noun. Okay, well, what verbs is that associated with? When does that noun function as the subject of any given verb, or the object, or the indirect object? Uh, that's just an example, but there are a number of reports you can get, not only about the word itself, and everything's linked to other resources like lexicons and dictionaries, but you can also get reports on how a word is used. There are distribution graphs, for instance. You can see who uses that word in what book and how often, and you can in some cases see patterns of usage like that. There's all different kinds of things you can do with it, but you have to be able to enable people, uh, unless you're scholars and you use the primary source databases for stuff like this,
Hmm.
that the person who's not a specialist needs something like the reverse interlinear, and there's literally nothing else like it because we developed it. But you have to have something like that so that you can start from English, a translation, and then do original language searching and not be dependent on being able to sight read in the original languages.
So this is kind of like the key for non-scholars.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of the centerpiece of the software. It is the thing around which a lot of our tools now revolve and link back into and connect with. So it's the centerpiece of the flagship product, which is Logos Vital software. Very convenient.
Do you find that this has a mass appeal? I mean, this is not just for nerds. This is not just for Bible nerds. This is
Mhm.
something that can be used by everybody. And I think that
Yeah.
if you really want to understand the translations, you've even said this in your lectures, you have to go back to the original source material. You can't just take something for granted that you
Mhm.
see in a translation.
Yeah. Yeah. And being able to look at something in more than one way. I mean, what people typically think of as Bible study, something beyond Bible reading nowadays, and I was no different. After I'd read the Bible a couple times, I graduated to like Strong's Concordance or school dictionaries that were keyed to Strong's Concordance using Strong's numbers, and that was good. That was the logical thing to graduate to. But the reality is, when you look in a lexicon like that, all it gives you is a list of English alternatives, different ways you could translate it.
Yeah.
And while that's beyond reading, that's really primitive. Nowadays with something like the reverse interlinear, like I said, you can find grammatical relationships, you can detect patterns of usage within a book or across a number of books. You can actually search on grammatical form, even though, like, let's say you had enough Greek. Let's say you had a semester of Greek, and you've heard about something like the aorist tense.
Hmm.
You can even search for that. You can search for specific grammatical information on the word you're interested in, because the software does the work for you. Everything is linked under the hood. You don't have to sort of know what you're looking for necessarily and be able to like type out the search terms. You don't have to do any of that. It's all there sort of set up for you to tell it what you want it to do. And again, it's all English.
So you can get this on your phone as well, right?
You can't right today, as of today. I mean, we're almost there. This is actually what a lot of the development team is working on. The software is platform agnostic. Doesn't matter if you're Windows or Mac, and it works on devices. However, we don't have full parity yet between the desktop version and the handheld version. You can do some searching in on your handheld like your phone, but you can't do everything you could do on a desktop yet. So that's sort of the thing. We're at version 7 right now. Um, I don't know if Logos 8 will achieve full parity yet or not, but it's getting close. So yeah, you can do a lot on your handheld device, and it'll sync. Whatever you can do, and you do in one thing will sync in the cloud, to your desktop application too. But you can't repeat everything yet on a handheld, but you can do a lot of things.
Well, I'd kind of like to switch gears and talk about
Mhm.
how you got your start. You were kind of a rebel of sorts when you were growing up.
Yeah, in the other direction.
Yeah, I was gonna say it in the other direction. Most kids, they were into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and your problem was the actual reverse.
Yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, I had no spiritual peer group. When I was a kid, I had, my parents, they would have told you, oh yeah, well, we're a Lutheran, we're a this, we're a that. But we never went. I it just didn't happen. Nobody really cared. So when I became a Christian through the influence of a friend and his family, which was a single mom with four kids, and two of them had cystic fibrosis, they struggled a lot. But it was through their influence that I first heard the gospel and became a Christian. Then the problem was I was sort of isolated. I was the only one in my family that had, this interest or inclination or anything like that. So it created some conflict, as you could imagine. It created some pretty awkward situations. But yeah, I was sort of a rebel in the other direction. Just having a sense that I need to obey my parents. I need to be a good example. They need to be disabused of the notion that I'm in a cult. I need to be as good of a son as I possibly could, and let them know why I'm doing it. I'm doing this because I want you to have the faith that I have, and so we can share that and whatnot. So yeah, it was interesting. I have lots of interesting stories I could tell you,
Yeah, I bet.
going through high school in that set of circumstances.
Yeah, Carmen and I were in the same situation. We brought our Bibles to school and we're kind of misfits. People thought we were
Mm.
strange, and they'd actually try to provoke us and write demonic things on the blackboard to get us to be angry.
Yeah, well, I had my parents years later. I mean, they're both believers. 25, 30 years down the road, they became believers. And they told me, I guess it was they felt they needed to confess this, but they said we used to do things to you and say things to you just to see what you would do. They had to know it was real, and so that's understandable. But to have your parents sort of look at you as something to prod, um, something to test, just gives you an idea of the environment, I guess.
Right.
Um,
Did you find that as you started to dig into the Bible and look at more of the history and the background to the Bible, is it harder to keep your faith or convince others or to convince yourself? How's that pan out for you?
no, I would say the more. I mean, it works in a couple of ways. I mean, one of the things that you learn going through graduate school and developing the skills and just getting the experience of being a biblical scholar is you learn that there are so many more questions that you would like to have answered. And I certainly have had that experience, but I literally have never come across anything that really did not have a clear, coherent response, or answer, or at least a way to approach a question. Um, and I think I might be a little more sensitive to this than many people out there, because I get emails with some fair regularity of people saying, I left the faith, or I'm no longer a Christian because, or I dumped this, or the Bible's wrong because of that. And quite honestly, the reasons that I get are just dumb reasons.
Hmm.
But they're only dumb because I've had the experience of having to, as an academic, consider those questions and then search for answers, and really find out that, wow, this thing I thought was a conundrum has really received a lot of attention. in the academic world. And there are a number of ways you could approach this that make good sense. The problem, of course, is a lot of that discussion, a lot of that research never filters down to the church, to the average person,
Right.
and they get caricatures of the question, or they get caricatures of the answer, or they get no response at all, and they're misled into thinking.
It's called straw man, right?
Yeah, it's all trauma and stuff. They get misled into thinking that oh wow, my buddy over here, from work has found the key to undermining the Bible, and it's like that just couldn't be further from the reality. But people are cut off from really really good information, or we live in the information age. The good stuff is so crowded out by the noise. You lose the signal for the noise because there's just so much that's thrown at you, like in a Google search or something. And people don't realize that there's a whole world of information, academic information, that transcends Google.
Well, really?
you know, but it's the academics that get that stuff, and it's not publicly accessible. You don't run into it unless you talk to an academic, or you sit in somebody's class and they force you to use something like journals.
Yeah. What's that?
So it's a little bit frustrating for me to consider how people are misled, either intentionally or unintentionally, and they're cut off from information. But in my own experience, there really is nothing new under the sun. There's nobody's going to come up with something that hasn't received really deep consideration, really thoughtful consideration from all perspectives. And a lot of these things that trip people up, or propel them, away from truth, or away from the faith. Really, a lot of it's about how the question is framed, and whether you incorporate all the data or not. Data bias and that sort of thing. So I feel quite good. Quite. I'll use the word satisfied, even though there's a lot of questions I have about a lot of things, but I haven't come across anything that would shake me from core ideas like theism and Christianity, Christology, and whatnot.
Okay. Well, not to attempt to shake your faith, but
Mhm.
the kinds of things I'm talking about with respect to history is are you familiar with Jordan Maxwell?
I am a little bit. Go. I'll let you finish the question. I don't want to be. I don't want to be too unkind to him, so I'll let you finish the question. We'll try to zero in on specifics.
Okay. Well, he brings up that there's 16 different saviors in various
Right.
religions, and then so it's
They're similar except for the places where they're not, which he doesn't tell you about. And that's typically the strategy. Now, I Jordan Maxwell is not his real name. I know people who know who Jordan Maxwell really is.
okay.
I the They don't think a whole lot of him as a person, but I'm going to stick to the research here. What Maxwell and others do is they mistake. They commit a number of fundamental mistakes, and you have to decide whether they're deliberate. Is it malice, or is it incompetence? I don't really know.
All right. That's fair.
But they'll confuse correlation for causation. That's a fundamental problem in all. I guess what we'll just make a sweeping generalization here and call it alternative research. These two things look the same, so one caused the other. Really? Well, how would we know that? The short answer is, in a lot of these cause and effect uh, sort of arguments that are made by Maxwell and others, there is no data. There are no data, excuse me, to establish a cause and effect relationship. And the analogies are only as good as the contrarian data points that they weed out. You get this with the Isis and Osiris stuff. You get this with the Dionysus stuff. You get this with the Mithras stuff. If you take away all the places where the analogy breaks down, oh, they look wonderful. They look compelling. And they know that you're not a content expert. Their audience is not a content expert. And so how many people are really going to check?
Right.
How many people are really going to call them on the carpet? Well, the answer is very few. And even the people who could, they don't waste their time on Jordan Maxwell.
Hmm.
They're looking for people who do peer-reviewed research. If Jordan Maxwell is not submitting his work to peer review, that tells you either he has something to hide or he's afraid it'll get destroyed. That's what peer review is about. You submit your work to field experts to see if you've missed something or if you've handled the data well and correctly. And guys like Maxwell never do this. They want to portray themselves as the misunderstood genius. Oh, I would do that, but the reviewers will just they won't appreciate my brilliance, or they're part of a big conspiracy. They won't accept what I say because they disagree. Look, I got news for Mr. Maxwell. Journals regularly publish stuff that their reviewers disagree with the view that's presented. The issue isn't agreement. There are hundreds of journals. Let's say you run into one where the reviewer says, oh, I don't like this guy, we're not doing it. Great, submit it somewhere else. Because you're going to have dozens and dozens of opportunities to put your work before a panel of peer review experts. And if it's good research, someone's going to publish it. And they often publish things they don't agree with, sometimes so much that the lead editor of a journal will append a note saying, hey, we thought this was good research. Nobody really agreed with the conclusion, but there are the data. It's up for you to decide. They do stuff like that all the time. So people who won't submit their research to the review of experts, like I said, either have something to hide or they sense that it's going to be destroyed. And honestly, why should they do that? They can put it out on the internet and say basically whatever they want and get a big audience and become popular,
Hmm.
become important. And that's what Maxwell's doing.
So you're saying he's kind of stacking the deck with certain data.
They
And
all stack the deck. They all confuse correlation with causation. They all use data selectively. And in Maxwell's case, when he tries to make linguistic arguments, he's just hopelessly incompetent. People can go to drmsh.com and put his name in, put Maxwell. I have a little response to his ISIS Ra L argument.
Mhm.
Okay, anyone who knows the languages knows in a few sentences that Maxwell has no idea what he's doing. He is a language amateur, and that's kind of generous. I don't think he spent even more than a couple days even looking at languages. He probably doesn't even know the alphabet for half of the stuff that he's doing. So,
I think he relies on Sitchin.
and this is what they do. They will quote each other. They'll build a little cadre of people who mutually agree with the direction of this or that point of research, and they mutually reinforce each other, and they sort of build their own little quote unquote academic community. But none of these people ever submit their experts to field experts. Oh, they'll quote the field experts when they need to, when they want to bring in an expert into the discussion to make it appear that the expert is on their side. Or if the expert were in the room with me, he'd say, yes, Jordan, you have a point here. That's what they do. Okay, it is sophistry. It is selective use of data. It's incompetence in some respects. And it's a fear of analysis. And personally, I mean, I know we're being recorded here. I would say the same thing if he were in the room right here with me. I challenge the quality of his work because it's not difficult to challenge.
Didn't you have something? You had an arrangement where Art Bell said he was gonna set up something where you could challenge each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah, and I think we both knew that it wasn't going to happen. I mean, Zechariah Sitchin is not, he's deceased now. He's passed away. But yeah, that was back in 2001, I think. It's a while ago, where I was on the show with Art, and he asked if I would debate Zechariah Sitchin on his show, about Sitchin's work, and I said sure. It never happened. Sitchin would never agree to that, and we both sort of knew that, but it was nice of Art to suggest that. To be honest with you, there would have been a number of things that wouldn't have translated well to radio, but I would have still done it. I mean, it's real simple with Sitchin. Give me one line of one cuneiform tablet that tells me that the Anunnaki are associated with Nibiru, or that Nibiru cycles through our solar system every 3,600 years. Give me one line of one tablet.
Hmm.
How easy would it be to make Mike go away if that were true? I only put it that way because I know it's not true. And I try to get people, I made a video on my sitchiniswrong.com website showing people how to tap into this the Sumerian stuff. Again, you don't have to be a specialist. It exists in databases. I told people how to type in the search for Anunnaki. It's going to search all of the all the tablets where Anunnaki show up. There are a number of epics and little smaller fragments here and there. And you can find I'm trying to remember what the total count. I think it's like 187 hits or something like that. You can look them all up in English. There is literally not a line in any tablet that makes the fundamental claims that Sitchin makes.
Hmm.
So it's not about me disagreeing with his translation. You can't translate what doesn't exist.
So they're just connecting the dots really far
Right.
apart, right?
Right. I mean, they're just, and you know, when Maxwell dips into the research of somebody like Sitchin, and Maxwell, let's just be honest, he's not going to look. He's not going to do research to see if Sitchin is correct. He already buys into the Sitchin worldview, and he finds certain points of what Sitchin says convenient to some other thing he wants to say. So he's just going to go with it. But again, when you do that and you go back to Sitchin like I've done and say, look, he's literally just making stuff up. I mean, it literally doesn't exist. Then you've got a real problem. But again, who's going to do that? These people understand that they can say certain things and make a pretty good living, at what they're saying and become important, be big fish in a very small pond. And that's it's better than a day job. That's just what they're going to do. They know people aren't going to check them. They're not going to have the skills to check them. And if anybody ever does, then you become part of the conspiracy. Well, I'm sorry, but I didn't take the tablets out of the database, the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature. I didn't remove anything. I have no connection to the project, and the whole idea is very stupid. It These databases exist. You can tap into them.
Yeah, obviously, you're very passionate about the subject, and that's probably why you have a whole website dedicated to it.
I don't like when primary sources are abused, and I don't like when people are deceived. I don't know Sitchin. I've had people, and I'm not going to out anybody here, but I've had people in this what we'll call this lecture circuit. The Art Bell coast to coast lecture circuit, big names. I've actually had them call me or tell me at conferences things like, "Oh, Sitchin was a disinformation agent. Oh, he's working for the Illuminati. Oh, he's this. Oh, he's that." And I look at it and say, "Look, I don't believe any of that. I just think Sitchin was a normal guy. He saw, hey, I can make a living doing this, and I'm going to do it." And maybe he came to believe his own mythology. I don't think he was a government agent. I don't think he was some esoteric member of whatever cult or oh, okay, I guess that he could have had been a member of this or that. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's no way to establish this, and I don't believe it because I need to see proof that he was the thing you're saying. But you actually have people again who would they're certainly not going to be on my side, but they actually believed really strange things about Sitchin. And some of these people talk about themselves. They talk about other people in this group, and I don't know why I get these conversations from time to time, but I just think, look, it's just easier than this. There's no accountability. They're going to say what they want. They're going to make money. They're going to become popular. You know, they're going to have people ask for their autographs. It really doesn't have to be much more complicated than that. It sure beats selling insurance. They're interested in what they talk about. I don't know that any of them are really like twisted people who want to deceive as many people as possible. I guess that's possible too. But
Hmm.
I tend to gravitate toward the simplest explanation that nobody's going to call me on the carpet here, and I've got a safe answer if they do. You're just part of the conspiracy. You misunderstand my brilliance too.
So, in other words, what you're saying is that if you have an idea, it's very healthy to go out and get feedback and get criticism and try to defend your position even publicly rather than just hiding, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use myself as an example here. So, I'm nowadays, what's getting attention, that what I do is the book Unseen Realm. Well, I talk about it in the introduction. Unseen Realm used to exist as a draft that was free on the internet, called The Myth That Is True. It's really the result of 15 years of work. It was a putter project. I didn't, frankly, I thought a lot of evangelical publishers or Christian publishers wouldn't have the courage to publish it because it it was uncomfortable, and I was a little naive there. There would have been certainly some that would have. I mean, Lexham winds up publishing it, and that's all well and good. But the point is, it took 15 years to do that. In the midst of those 15 years, here's why I'm bringing it up.
Mm.
I was submitting articles on the core ideas of the book to peer review. So people can go to drmsh.com and click on About and get my CV. I have my full CV there. I try to keep it up to date. And there's a whole section of it, peer-reviewed articles.
Okay.
I've got a number of articles on peer review because I knew that's the first thing people are going to say when they disagree. Oh, who's this? It's just Heiser. He has these weird idiosyncratic ideas. It's him alone against the world. No, it actually isn't. What I've actually done is I've submitted my work to peer review, and it's passed muster. Other scholars recognize the quality of this. So if you don't like it, well, that's too bad, but you can't use this dumb argument. You can't hide behind this argument that it's just Heiser and nobody else thinks this way. I use only peer-reviewed sources, and I submit my work to peer review for that reason. I want scholars to catch me on, like, did I miss something? Am I just messing up this point? Because honestly, even as a scholar, you can't be an expert in everything. It's very hard to keep up with anything in your field. There are thousands of pages in journals produced really every quarter of the year.
You just have to pick wisely.
You got to land somewhere. You got to drill down. You got to develop some expertise. And again, even there, you submit your ideas to field experts, because if you did miss something that, boy, and they'll just write back to you. This is the way the process works. You'll get your manuscript back from a reviewer, and I've had things turned down that I had to resubmit. It's like, well, you missed this, or this article just came out and it's not in your footnotes. You need to go back and read that and then interact with it. That's a good process. It helps you. It helps you to do the best job that you can. And if you're just headed off into some area that somebody just spots a really significant problem here, it actually saves you from the embarrassment of having something published and overlooking something important. And that's what peer review is about. It's actually designed, yeah, it'll weed nonsense out, but at this level, when you're submitting work to a peer-reviewed journal, there are very few nutbags, that are just doing this, or people just going out and being lone wolves. So they don't have to do a whole lot of that, but it's really designed to help you do the best job you can, and then not be sort of caught on the other end like you missed something. So it's a very positive process, even though it's sort of looked at like a winnowing agent. I mean, it does do that, but on the other side, it's very helpful, because you just can't be an expert in everything.
Yeah, that's true. What are you working on currently? I mean, like right now, if you weren't talking to me, you'd be doing something else.
Yeah, I'd be working on the book that Lexham Press wants me to write. It's their subsidiary of my employer, so that's what I'd be doing. The book on angels, so just the good guys.
Does it have a working title?
Yeah, the working title. Actually, let me just bring that up here because I changed it yesterday.
Oh, okay.
uh,
So this is hot off the press.
the working title is God's Holy Ones. The subtitle is The Heavenly Host in the Old Testament, Second Temple Judaism, and the New Testament.
Okay, so does it follow one of your other books?
No, it's not Unseen Realm 2 or anything like that, but it's kind of like reversing Hermon. It's a drill down into a specific area that was in Unseen Realm, but it's not what I'd call a follow up to it. It's an addition.
Is this something that you were interested in and you pitched it to them?
A little bit of both. We always meet in January and kind of have our, hey, what do you want to do this year, or what what do you have time to do this year? What do we want you to do? That kind of thing. So it was something that emerged from that meeting.
Okay, so you have these regular meetings with Logos software?
Yeah, I mean the corporate name is Faith Life. They're the makers of Logos Bible software. That's still the flagship product. And then they have there's actually like 10 sort of sub corporate entities under that, and Lexham Press is one of them. It's, I don't know, it's 5 or 6 years old, something like that. So I work for the company, which is known mostly for the software, but we do print things too. So that's where the press comes in.
You're pretty busy.
Yeah, yeah. I don't really have to worry about looking for things to do.
You're at that point in your career where things just find you.
Yeah, too many things find me, and then they conflict. I guess that's a good problem to have. I guess I'd rather do that than just wonder, what I should do with my time or go watch TV or something. But, yeah,
I noticed it said on your website that you're watching your kids grow, and that's like an example of supernatural.
yeah,
Are
the paranormal.
are the kids interested in your work at all?
I would say they all are in little different ways, and to some degree, there's some interest there. Nobody's like really into it. They're into you know young adult teenage things. So
Yeah.
I occupy a little bit of space.
I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you, since you're the expert and I'm the layman, as you say on the show.
That line's dated.
Yeah.
Freya's trademark.
Okay, well, I hope you have a little bit more time to talk about this.
Sure, right. We got 15 or 20 minutes here. Go ahead.
Just quickly, yeah, okay. So this has to do with Genesis 8:22,
Hmm.
and it's where we are promised paradise forever. There's a lot of religious groups that see paradise as being for all eternity. In this case, when you look at the actual language, there's a word called ode. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I'm looking at Genesis 8:22, and I'm trying to see where you get paradise in there. Do you have the right verse reference?
Okay, maybe I should. Well, this is what.
Well, let me read. This is the ESV. Let me just read what I'm looking at, and you can tell me if I'm at the wrong place. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.
That's correct.
Right? I look at that and say, well, as long as we have an earth, we're going to have seasons. We're going to have cycles, day and night, summer and winter, and all that. I don't see paradise in that. I do see the earth working the way it should, but
We work with Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's kind of how we fell into all of this, and came across your
okay.
work. They see things one way, and then we go to the source material and we see it differently.
Hmm.
Since they believe that the earth will remain forever, this is one of the things that they cite as being, this is a promise that the earth is going to last forever and be a paradise
Hmm.
based on other verses.
So are they sort of using the you brought up ode?
Ode.
Okay, so what's their argument?
What we understand ode to be is that, um, as far as we can see, suggesting that we may not be able to see into all eternity. We can just see so far. Just like you look off into the distance and you see the horizon, maybe there's something beyond it, but maybe not. Does that seem like it's accurate here in this situation?
It seems to confuse ode with a word like olam.
Hmm.
Olam is your sort of normative word for everlasting.
Okay.
There are a few passages where it could be even eternal. For instance, in Psalm 90, from olam to olam, thou art God. There, I think you could argue that it refers to eternality because it's applied to God Himself. But ode can mean something like still, or something is still enduring. Kind of a constancy idea. It could mean again, like it's a repetition of something that's gone before, but with no with no hint of it's going to just keep repeating. In other words, it could just repeat once, like it happens again, that kind of thing. So it can have both an enduring idea, and it can also have, maybe a good word would be, an intermittent idea, where there's something and then that something doesn't happen, then it happens again, and it might happen a little bit later. The intermittent or something, with more endurance. The word's going to be used in either way in different places.
Okay, so the Earth could even be destroyed, and then it will suddenly come to be again, and that would be consistent with the intermittent connotation.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of Genesis 8, let me just look at it in Hebrew. Yeah, Od leads the verse here. Uh, yeah, so you have Od and then Kol Yamei Haaretz. So you have Od and then all the days of the earth. So, and then you get, into the series of, summer and winter and all that kind of stuff. So all the days of the earth, that's where the ESV gets, while the earth remains. You could translate it more literally. All the days of the earth. So Od, all the days of the earth, seed time, harvest, cold, heat, summer, winter, day, night, shall not cease. So I think that the key here is all the days of the earth, which suggests, that you could look at Od there as, just as I said a few minutes ago, as long as there is an earth, in other words, while the earth endures, there's your enduring aspect to Od. As long as the earth is here, while the earth, endures, as long as it endures, you're going to have cycles of seasons and cycles of time, so on and so forth. You could have. I think it would probably be reading the last few chapters of Revelation, maybe a couple of other chapters. If you read them into Genesis 8:22,
Hmm.
which really isn't the recommended procedure because they're so much later than Genesis 8:22. But if you read them into that, you could probably say, well, you could have the earth end and then restart again, and you'd have these things. In other words, the intermittent idea. I don't really think that's the point here, because you have to read one thing into the other. If you just take the verse for what it is, it's, hey, as, God's going to promise in the next chapter to never, destroy the earth, and with a flood and all that kind of stuff again. Um,
Hmm.
so as long as the earth remains, as long as God doesn't destroy it, it's going to go on like it should.
You consider yourself an exegete, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I try to, for your listeners that to whom that might be a foreign word. Uh, Exegesis is about deriving meaning from the text, and the reverse of that is also true. That what you say, you need to be able to justify textually.
Okay.
You need to be able to root it in the primary. So yeah,
The name of your blog, The Naked Bible, that's kind of what
yeah,
it's about, is just stripping it all down, trying to understand everything, not on some based on some dogma or something made up, but just what you see is what you get, right?
yeah. And the subtitle of the blog, or the sub idea, is biblical theology without, filtering the Bible through creeds and confessions. And as I've said many times, the idea is not that we're hostile to creeds and confessions. It's just that we keep them in their place. They're historically conditioned documents. They're typically responding to something. They're typically just distillations of core ideas, but they are not the text of Scripture. We don't judge Scripture by the creeds. We should be judging the creeds by Scripture. So we try to strip all that away, hence the title Naked Bible. And what we really care about, what sort of drives my bus is, I'm really concerned only with what the text can sustain.
All right.
The text isn't always going to be so, evident that there's only one way to look at it. There are a number of passages that, well, there's two or three possibilities here. So at the end of the day, it's, well, can you show me how this is derivable and defensible from the text or not? Can you do that? And if you can mount a good argument from primary sources from the text, then okay, your idea gets on the table. If you can't do that, well, then it's not on the table. So again, at the end of the day, what we care about on the podcast, and really where I try to remain oriented, is, what can the text sustain? And of course, it's the text, understood in its own context, which is the ancient world, not a later context. So, like when with Unseen Realm, I say things like, the goal of the book is to have the ancient Israelite living in your head, or the first century Jew living in your head. You try to be able to read the text the way they would have read it, because they were the immediate audience. It was written to them by someone who lived and wrote in their own time period, and it involves worldview. It involves, genre. It involves lots of things, but the context, the right context for interpreting the Bible, is the context that produced the Bible. So it's a simple idea. I think a pretty straightforward idea. Interpret the text in its own context, and then what we say about it, we need to be able to root in the text. So what can the text sustain?
Yeah, you can't just say something and then not back it up. That's not good scholarship.
Yeah, and if you claim to be studying this document, we call the Bible, it would make sense to derive your conclusions from the document.
Yeah, that makes
That
sense.
doesn't seem too complicated. Yeah,
I mean,
it's
unless you
simple but not easy, but it's still simple.
you could be a person that channels directly with God, and then you could just write your own stuff, I guess.
Sure, sure. Yeah, why not? That makes your job a whole lot easier. Wait a minute, let me check with myself. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Okay, one more quick question, and this question probably could take up a whole other hour. But you talk about divine counsel constantly, and Psalm 82 and 89 are the principal ones that we deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and how do you tie them together? I mean, we've had people
Yeah.
say that we don't think that 89 ties in with 82. Can you answer that in a nutshell?
Oh, sure. So in Psalm 82:1, you have Elohim, of course, occurred twice in the same verse. Elohim Nitzav Ba'ada'el. God has taken his place in the divine council. We know it's the singular deity there because Nitzav, the next verse in the Hebrew, is a singular participle. So we appropriately translate it capital God. All right. So God has taken his place in the divine council. And then the next line is, in the midst of the gods he holds judgment. Bekerav Elohim Yishpot. So in the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. The second one's plural because in the midst of, the preposition tells you that. It's grammar. It's not hard. It's not hard Hebrew. So there you have God presiding over a group, of gods, Elohim. One Elohim presiding over a group of other Elohim. Well, you go down to verse 6. The Elohim God, the capital G God is speaking, and he says to the group, I said, you are gods. Okay, you are Elohim. Same word right there in verse 6. Sons of the Most High, all of you. Now, if we can agree on who the Most High is, that would be God, the God of Israel, the God of the Psalm. Then what we have here in verses 1 and verse 6 is we have plural Elohim, who are also referred to as sons of God, in this case, sons of the Most High. Now, you can go to Psalm 89, and unless you're willing to, if you want to say, well, the God of Psalm 89 isn't the same God as Psalm 82, like there's some other God that's most high,
Right.
then you have a different problem. But if you're not going to be a polytheist,
Okay.
then you go over to Psalm 89 and you have the same language. You have the sons of God. The verses are, for the sake of your audience, in English Bibles it would be verses 5 through 7. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, for thy name it's Yahweh. Your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord, or to Yahweh? Who among the heavenly beings, this is the ESV, in Hebrew it's who among the B'nai Elim, the sons of God, is like the Lord, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. Again, unless you want to have two most highs, which of course is an oxymoron, or you want to have another most high other than the God of Israel,
Yeah.
you've got the same God in a council with the sons of God. They're B'nai Elim here, they're B'nai Elyon in the other psalm. They're both referred to as Elohim. By virtue of Psalm 82. And of course, this isn't the only psalm. You've got Psalm 29. You've got references to Elohim, plural Elohim, all over the place. And people get creeped out about it because we're taught in churches, and frankly, just in Western civilization, when we see the letters God, we mentally, again, because this is the way we're taught. This is Western culture. We mentally assign a specific set of unique attributes to the letters G, O, and D. In other words, we can't help looking at Geo and D and be thinking of omniscience, omnipotence, eternality, sovereignty, creatorship, all this sort of stuff. So that's why if we put an S on the end of it, people freak out. Well, the problem is that the biblical writers did not think the same way about the word Elohim. When they wrote Elohim down on a parchment, they weren't thinking of a unique set of attributes unless they were talking about a specific God of Israel. They say, well, how do we know that? Do we just take Mike's word for it because he has a PhD? No, you shouldn't. What you should do is you should concord all the places where Elohim exists. And I've actually done this for people. If you go to sitsandiswrong.com under Elohim, you're going to find the whole PDF of all the places where Elohim shows up in the Bible. But what you find when you go through all that stuff, and I have, I mean, it's boring, but it's important. Elohim is actually used of half a dozen different entities, spiritual entities, in the Bible. Now, that alone tells you that a biblical writer is not assigning a unique set of attributes to the word, because then it can't be unique. The attributes can't be unique if all of the Elohim have it. And that's not what they're thinking. Well, how do we know that? Well, you go to 1 Samuel 28:13. The deceased human dead, in this case Samuel, are referred to as Elohim. Well, no biblical writer, frankly, no one in their right mind would think, well, my dead brother, my dead baby, my dead aunt or uncle has the same attributes as the God of Israel.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
That's why it's a little, yeah, it's kind of silly to take this the Elohim and just put in Jehovah.
It's not about,
right?
You don't get the uniqueness of the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, from a word. You don't get the uniqueness of Yahweh of Israel from the word Elohim, because Elohim used a different thing. So that's the mistake we make. We assign a unique set of attributes to the letters D, O, D, because that's what we're taught. That's how we're taught to think about those letters, D, O, and D. But biblical writers just didn't think that. They used what? So you say, what does Elohim mean? Elohim is just a word you would use. Well, let's put it this way: a biblical writer would use Elohim, to label a disembodied spiritual entity.
So it's a dweller of the spirit world.
Right, exactly. And that's all it is. So in that world, Yahweh is, of course, a member of that world. Yahweh is an Elohim. But there's lots of Elohim. But he's an Elohim, but no other Elohim is him. He gets distinguished in the biblical material by the way he's talked about, not by the word Elohim. That doesn't really mean anything other than, oh, you're a member of the spiritual world. Well, good for you. Now we know your address. We know where you live. So Yahweh is distinguished in the way he's talked about. He's the only one that's referred to as the creator. He's the only one to whom omnipotence is assigned. He's the only one to whom omniscience is assigned. No other Elohim ever get talked about this way. And that's why he can say there's none beside me. There's none like me. There's this terminology that we have. I go into all of this in Unseen Realm in a lot of detail. But Psalm 82 and Psalm 89, again, unless you think there's two most highs, which you got a logic problem there, or somehow you're a polytheist and you think Elyon and Yahweh are different beings, or something. There's something else going on there. And I've actually talked extensively about that idea in peer-reviewed literature, and I have some published journal articles about that deal with Israelite religion. So we don't want to let somebody like Jordan Maxwell come along and say, yeah, that is the case, and snooker people. Okay, again, I'm published on that too. You'd have to get the citations from my CV, which is available on my website, or the footnotes of Unseen Realm. You can find that stuff. It's not the case. So unless you're willing to go down both of those dead ends,
mm-hmm.
you see very obviously that Psalm 82 and Psalm 89 is an assembly of the sons of God, over which is that thing is ruled by the God of Israel, the God of the Bible. And the problem, of course, is that people who don't want them connected, they don't want them connected because Psalm 89 is the passage that very clearly says that the counsel is in the skies, it's in the heavens. Because if you look at evangelical sources, they'll say things like, oh, the plural Elohim of Psalm 82, those are just people. Those are Israelite elders. Those are the judges of Israel. They're just human. There's nothing to see here, citizen. Move along.
Yeah.
Again, that is not. That's an idea that is not terribly difficult to destroy and undermine because of the text, not because Mike is just in a bad mood. It's because of the text. So I published on all this stuff under peer review, uh, several journal articles. Again, you can get the whole list if you look at the CV, the resume that's available. You can find those things. And of course, in the book Unseen Realm. But we don't need to hide from the Bible. We don't need to protect people from the Bible. Um, we don't need to say, just let it be what it is.
Just let it be naked, right?
Yeah, let it be naked. A lot of people think though that they need to say goofy stuff about it to protect it or protect people.
Yeah.
Again, it's you got a really small God if that's the way you're thinking.
I'm going to have to end it there. I know we're in overtime. This is like a football game, and
we're in sudden death here. We've hit sudden death.
Again, thank you for coming on our show.
Sure.
Watchtower Babel Radio. We're going to sign off with Dr. Michael Heiser. Again, your website, drmsh.com, right?
Yep, drmsh.com.
You can get into the treasure trove, sign up for things, blogs, podcasts, videos, everything. Everything's there.
Yep, that's the nerve center.
What does the S stand for, by the way?
Steven with a V, my middle initial. So it's DR as in doctor and then my initials. So clever, isn't it?
Well, it works. It works.
It works. I actually did it because my original website was michaelsheiser.com and nobody could spell my last name.
Oh.
They get the E and the I messed up and not find the site or leave out the initial. So I just made the abbreviation.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yep, you too. Thank you for having me.